Well, welcome to the Unstoppable Freedom Podcast. I'm Jimmy Page. The American system of government and all of our founding principles are under attack from just about every angle. There is, it's been said, a culture war raging that seems to be turning long-standing accepted truths into lies, and it seems to be calling good evil and evil good in many ways. This culture war is being fought in every major platform in America, from politics to morality, to criminal justice, foreign policy. Plus, there are attacks on medical health freedom. There's open censorship in the media and even collusion between the government agencies and some social media platforms. Everything that goes against the government narrative seems to be silenced. And perhaps most notably and most destructively, the education of our kids has in many ways become ground zero in this culture war. Good, everyday, patriotic Americans are tired. Many are fed up and asking one simple question: what can we do about it? And that's why I'm really excited about our guest today, because he has tremendous passion for America. He's got experience in virtually every one of these areas. And I believe he's going to inspire you to stand up in your own unique sphere of influence to defend freedom and secure it for our children and hopefully generations to come. Our guest today is the Honorable Bob Schaffer. And Bob has served 9 years in the Colorado State Senate before representing Colorado's 4th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1997 to 2003. Now, this is really interesting. He left Congress to honor a voluntary term limit pledge that he had taken. And he's currently the headmaster at Liberty Common High School, an award-winning charter school in Fort Collins, and he serves as chairman of the leadership program of the Rockies. They are a premier civic leadership training program in Colorado. Bob, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks, Jimmy. Good morning.
Good morning. You know, I've gotten to know you over the last 9 months as part of the leadership program of the Rockies class of 2023. As we like to say, the best class ever. I'm not sure that's true, but we're going to go with that. But I've really learned and grown. You took the lead on many components of this. You're the chairman. You've taken the lead on many components of this. And I have grown so much in my understanding of, my appreciation for, and really, I think in many ways, my ability, hopefully, to defend America and the American way. Talk to me a little bit about the leadership program of the Rockies and why you're so passionate about that.
Sure. Well, it's a wonderful institution founded here in Colorado, and as the name suggests, serves the Rocky Mountain region. It's mostly those involved in it are mostly Coloradans, but there are people from throughout the Rocky Mountain West that are part of it too. It's an organization that convenes existing leaders from throughout Colorado every year, 65 per class, and it's kind of competitive to get in. We get a few hundred who apply every year and winnow that down to about 65 per year that are in the class. And so what does the program do? It's designed for those individuals who have a leadership profile anywhere. And we don't really care where. If you've got a constituency, then this is something you should care about. It could be you with a podcast and other things you do in life, in academia, in ministry, in education, in business of any sort. If you've got a constituency, then we have an interest, and you might have an interest in the program. And the program helps answer and facilitate those people who are in leadership who inevitably, regardless, just as in your introduction, you really put your finger on it, no matter what walk of life, your personal liberty, your freedom, your ability to envision a prosperous path forward or a glorious path forward for whatever your interests are, inevitably run into conflict with some government. It might be local, it might be state, it might be federal, we might just be talking about tax policy. It could be some regulatory structure. And it just could be the impact of the culture as it is affected by politics that ends up having an influence and an impact on your business. So leaders in these various walks of life, and when this occurs, scratch their head and talk with their colleagues. And the question comes up, what are we going to do? What can we do? Or how can they do this to us? And so so the leadership program in the Rockies is a good way for people who have a leadership profile to begin to understand better how they can engage in the public square to promote, to preserve, to protect, to advance whatever concern or cause they may have. Now, we tend to favor those who love America, those who believe that the vision of the American founding fathers was properly founded and well reasoned and anchored in solid philosophical consideration. We tend to favor those who we tend to attract those who favor capitalism, the freest expression of economic participation. And so, well, let's just leave it there. Those two general principles kind of define the kinds of people that find us and that are satisfied and that are fed through the academic processes and the skills component that you put your finger on and mentioned as well that we provide as an organization.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I learned early on was just how much I had to learn. I considered myself one of those patriotic Americans who loves America, loves what we stand for, loves our founding documents, really cherishes those things, and believes in the American way. And what I discovered was I probably didn't know as much about our history as I needed to. And I probably wasn't as skilled at defending that, at making a persuasive argument for the things that I believe so deeply. And one of the aspects of the program that you took the point on and were amazing at getting the best and the worst out of us was a section called Speak Out. And we were talking a little bit about it before we started this program, kind of off air. But, that's an opportunity for each one of us to, on the spot, be asked a question, be able to talk about those components and make a defense of it. Tell us a little bit about Speak Out and why that's so important.
Yeah, Speak Out's it's a skills development exercise that we do in the class, and it's exactly what you said, what you articulated, and that is, most people, they know about the founding of the country, they know about the Revolutionary War, and they know a little bit about the founding fathers, and they know about American history from, to the depth and extent that anyone would who succeeded in high school, maybe college, likes reading history and watching some historic movies from time to time and reading a few books. You know a lot, but then once we start taking a deep dive, and for example, what did the founders mean when they said that? What would be a good example that what does unalienable mean? What does it mean? What does self-evident mean? A self-evident truth, and we just dissect these words literally phrase by phrase, and it puts everything you already know, that anybody in the class already knows, in kind of a proper context that maybe has not been accentuated as much as it should have, or as well as it should have, throughout the education most of us received. And so all right, so with that as kind of the academic background, well, then over time, we start applying these concepts, the thinking of the founders. And this Dr. Cranwitter, one of the other lecturers, likes to say, we need to begin thinking like constitutionalists. And so we take that challenge and apply it to questions that we think we know an awful lot about. So I call on individual class members. I usually pick a topic that they know something about, and that might be their profession or something that they have some level of expertise at. And I will start asking questions that kind of go back to the basics, back to the fundamentals. I like the licensure questions. Let's take a realtor, for example. Somebody who buys and sells property and has a license from the state to do this. When I start asking, is it right that you have to go get permission from your state and pay the state money in order for you to sell a house and execute your craft, your profession? Then all of a sudden, realtors, or a realtor in the class, there usually are a few, who have just accepted this notion that they need a license, they need to pay the government to do their job.
Yes.
It turns their world upside down. Wait a minute. Why, all of a sudden in the Speak Out exercise, I'm asking them to defend this notion that they are willing to pay a government agent to give them permission to do their job. Does that sound like a free person to you? And next thing you know, it's just tying people in knots. And I go through that with even surgeons, for example. Why should a doctor who has a degree and went to medical school and is the expert, why should that person have to pay the government to serve somebody else? If we really believe in the free exchange in goods and services, why is this license justifiable? And so we really start asking questions about that's one example. We do this with every topic, all kinds of issues. And it's fun and it's instructive because it challenges the premises that people have accepted and urges them to begin to think like constitutionalists and apply it to their industry, their profession, a thing they know a lot about. So again, imagine 65 people in a classroom and I'm doing this one student at a time and it's intimidating. I try not to be, but the nature of it is.
Listen, you don't try not to be.
But the beauty is everyone else in the classroom is learning through every single example. And, it's hard when you've got the microphone in your hand and I'm in your face and I'm holding and you're standing in front of everyone else. But after we do this over the course of 8 classes that we do the exercise and we just do it every time we meet, it really helps everyone start thinking, as Cranwitter would suggest, as a constitutionalist, to the things that they do in their lives today.
Yeah. And what I loved about it, too, in my personal interaction with it, I got a topic that I didn't want, but I, took a stab at it. And during the process, what you find yourself doing is arguing with yourself. Like, well, this is what I think the principle is. We talk about individual rights. We talk about the proper role of government. So, and as you're making your argument, in the back of your head, you have some dissonance like, well, but, so you kind of end up arguing against yourself before you finally settle in on the principle and the argument.
Well, and so the value of all this for everybody who goes through the class and for everyone who needs this is, we tend to, debate our friends or engage in conversations or actually get in debates when it's time for debating around a board table, let's say, or a civic gathering. We tend to engage these conversations in emotional terms based on the proposition as it's delivered to us. And what the Speak Out exercise does as a microcosm for the whole class is helps us focus in on the fundamental principle. What is the American governing principle that ought to prevail in answering these kinds of questions when it's time to vote, or just answering these kinds of questions when a bunch of Americans are meeting in the stands at their kid's baseball game and having a conversation about whatever the issue is of the day. This is the essence of the program. This is what we try to accomplish: is help individuals become more influential, more persuasive on the terms of liberty and freedom, on Americanism, in any walk of life, in a casual conversation or in a professional conversation.
Yeah. And you get way more skilled at it. And I was thinking to myself, too, one of the things that you always coached us was to find some common ground on the values, on the principles, the things that you can agree on that kind of set the structure and the stage for the argument so that it's not just a knee-jerk emotional reaction or conversation, which, by the way, always ends up blowing up and never really persuades anybody to change their thinking. So that was one of the great benefits of that. And I have a question for you as a former elected official. You once said something, I think you echoed something, a kind of a common sentiment in the class, that no constitutional founder could be elected today, that it would be virtually impossible for those that framed up the government, that built it on the core principles that we have. It'd be very difficult for them to be elected today. What do you mean by that?
Well, in terms of what their legacy and record is today, and I imagine if Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin were around today, they would be astute enough to be able to persuade a modern audience. But with the record that they left behind, the the terms of absolute freedom that they advocated actually frighten Americans today. Many Americans, not you, not me, not many people that are associated with the leadership program of the Rockies, but many Americans today find great security and comfort in an obscene bureaucracy that is there to coddle and guide them and support and protect them, literally from cradle to grave. And when founders start speaking about communities or voluntary associations being the bedrock of things like charity, stopping hunger or eradicating hunger, or providing housing for the homeless, providing jobs and so on, and not government.
Right.
Many Americans today just can't imagine that. They can't imagine a society of generosity and charity that exists without government. Yeah. But those founders understood that, in fact, a government-free charitable system in America resulted in more charity. It resulted in more human assistance. It resulted in more human interaction and connection than government could ever envision. And so that's the point, is that they understood and they envisioned an America that was legitimately free to the greatest extent humanly possible. Yeah. And those kinds of statements today, well, they actually frighten people. And they run from them. They'll vote against candidates who offer freedom as a solution.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're always looking, I think there's this sentiment that we're looking for government to give us free stuff and to fix stuff and to come in and save the day. When I think in those original days, and probably for the first maybe 200 years of our country, there was this idea of self-reliance, of this active, engaged citizenry. You know, we talked about that being part of the foundation of America, that each individual citizen was responsible for their own pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that we have agency, that we have independence, and that we're not looking for outside sources to come and rescue us. Instead, we're the ones that are rolling up our sleeves and getting it done. And I think that's kind of the shift, the mind shift, if you will, that I'm most concerned about, is this idea that we become more and more dependent upon the government, and the government, doing what it always will do, is going to step in and take as much power as it can possibly take. It's going to gobble it up. And we're seeing that. I'm going to get into some more specifics that we're seeing, but I have a question before that around Abraham Lincoln. He noted that it was unlikely that America would ever be destroyed from the outside, but that if we faltered or if we lost our freedoms, it would be because we destroyed ourselves. Are you seeing evidence of that kind of environment being there today? Are we there?
Well, I think there are trends. I'm too optimistic to suggest that it's hopeless by any means, or that we're too far down a slippery slope. Yeah. But with what Lincoln and others were alluding to is this notion that if Americans actually fail to understand the basis for the foundation of the nation, that we'll lose the nation, that the republic will be doomed, and that education and a general agreement on public morals were the kinds of things that are necessary to galvanize a nation, to lead us toward unity sufficient that we can maintain, preserve, and create a more perfect union. That's what all of those great presidents refer to. You hear more of that today because there are more graphic examples that are brought to us by the same media that we're utilizing right now. The worst examples, the more graphic examples, seem to confront us more often. And I think it's true to the extent that there are enough Americans, and I'm not so persuaded it has to be a majority. As long as there are enough Americans who can persuasively articulate the terms of freedom and accentuate them in a way that occurs to a listener as more appealing than use of force, that those leaders are the ones who will be able to navigate a prosperous path forward for all Americans. And that's really what the leadership program of the Rockies is engaged in. Yeah. And as is my school and everything that I've been involved in, my church as well. These are all efforts to educate those with an open mind toward not the similar, but the identical viewpoints of our founders, which we can, it's interesting. We can say founders, and there are hundreds of them that we are talking about, but there's relative unity in their viewpoint on the country they were creating at the time, in late 1700s, early 1800s. We don't have that unity among our nation's leadership today, but there are a lot. And to the extent that we can find them, convene them, acquaint them with one another, form friendships, worship together. This is the reason I'm optimistic, because there are a lot of us, you and me, and I presume many of the people who are going to be watch your podcast as well. There are enough of us that if we're active and engaged and serious, God will bless us. And he always has. And the nation will prevail.
I love that. And I love that optimism and that's really why I got into the fight for freedom, into the fray, was because, number one, I saw a lot of our individual liberties and our individual rights being infringed upon, and it concerned me. And I certainly didn't like the level of public divide and discourse really getting ugly. And you mentioned something, I think the statement, just talking about God's involvement. And I think back to the Declaration of Independence. The final statement of the Declaration of Independence, where, the final statement that everybody signed to was, and for the support of this declaration, and with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. A pretty significant statement, because they knew what was at stake when they signed it. They know that they were going to be the enemy of the state, so to speak. Are we standing in a moment of time where we need that kind of courageous citizen to make this type of pledge in defense of American freedom today?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And the interesting thing of that final statement in the Declaration of Independence is the pledge that they made this was not a promise or an oath that the founders made to a government or even to the assembly, they made this pledge to each other. And just as you stated, we pledge to each other mutually our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And so, all right, when we understand that, it makes it easier to contemplate what we can do. I would make this pledge to you. You would make this pledge to me. I would hold you accountable. You would hold me accountable as people who live in a similar community, who have now been through the leadership program of the Rockies together, who become friends in patriotism in that sort of way. And that's what the founders were. They made this pledge to each other sitting around. And that's what their autograph was. I will sign this document of freedom and commit my life, fortune, and sacred honor to it, if you will too. And once they all sign, it is that collection of individuals, not a government. They hadn't created it yet. It's not some public agency that created a pathway forward or a vision, or established a set of principles. It was just ordinary individuals, well-educated individuals who rose to community leadership. It was just a bunch of humans who were intellectually aligned and spiritually aligned, generally enough that they could agree on. There's who was the founder? There was I'm forgetting the name of the founder who spoke about the importance of creating an American ethnicity, and that's what you see taking place there, and that's what is possible here today. As I say, there's a lot of negative that comes from social media and electronic communication, but there's a lot of good that comes with it as well. And it allows us to acquaint ourselves with people who are like-minded and just as patriotic and just as faithful all around the planet. And we're the ones who have to not rely on government, but rely on ourselves and our own energy and our own resources to come together and reinforce these American principles and do it in all of our walks of life.
Yeah, I love that. I never really actually considered the idea that they were making this pledge to one another. And I remember conversations that I've had with my neighbors saying, hey, you can count on me to defend freedom, to defend liberty. You can, and I'm hoping I can depend on you in the same respect. And that means in our engagement in our local community, in our engagement in our churches, in our neighborhoods. And so I love that picture that we're not pledging our allegiance to something beyond us. We're pledging our allegiance to one another. I love that. Listen, you're experienced in a lot of different aspects of public policy. We'll talk a little bit about that. I want to dive in a little bit on the topic of education because you're in the center of that. You're heading a charter school here in Colorado that is one of the best in the country for sure. I've invested a lot of my time into exposing the nonsense, is what I call it, the nonsense going on in our schools across the country and right here in Colorado from a public school perspective oftentimes, and also in developing tools and resources that empower parents to push back against the things that violate their values and indoctrinate their children. There's nobody better in my mind to talk about this than you. Let's start with the parent. What is the role of the parent with respect to the education of their kids?
Well, so great question. Parents, many parents in America have been trained improperly to assume, if you were to ask that question to most parents in our town, they would say that it's the school district's responsibility to educate the child. I've got a state constitution over here, right over there on my desk. In the state constitution, the state assumes the responsibility for educating all children. Well, that's a fine thing for the state to do on the state's terms. But the reality is, it is the role and responsibility, is their right and responsibility of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their children. It is no one else's. Now, others assist and are there to help. That's what a state is for, a school district is for, a charter school is for example, or a private school, or any other agency that exists to assist parents. But parents can never lose the understanding and their appreciation for the fundamental right. This is a function of natural law. It is the responsibility of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their children. And so as parents, we should cede none of that authority to anyone else, anyone outside of our household, anyone, let's leave it there. Anyone outside of our household. And from a school's standpoint, I think I appreciate the kind comments about the success of Liberty Common School. I think one of the reasons it does succeed is, sure, we've got a great curriculum, we've got outstanding instructors, but it is a clear understanding of this particular dynamic that the school does not exist to educate children. It's an odd thing to say for a very successful school. The school exists to assist parents in their responsibility of educating children. We offer a specific way and strategy to do that, and team and so on. But parents hire us to assist them. And when both sides understand that part of the equation, it results in a very, very powerful interaction where for a child, there's really no option. There's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. There's only one thing they can do, and that is learn and acquire knowledge at the pace, under the terms and conditions, and toward the goals that parents and teachers agree on. But ultimately, they're guided by children, and so we don't do all things here. Parents, if parents want some aspect of education that we don't offer in this building, well, we want to help them we want to help them find it elsewhere. And again, that's something else that changes the dynamic altogether. We hear people out in the streets yelling and screaming about the negative thing that's taught in one school or another, or the terrible book that is on the bookshelf. These are the wrong debate. If you're debating that, you're already conceding too much. No, the answer should be fine. There should be schools that want bad stuff. For parents who want their children to learn bad things, there really should be schools for them if that's their preference, because they're in charge. But for parents who want something better or more specific, or something that comports more directly with their own vision for their own children, those parents must be empowered with the ability to make the the right choice for the best academic setting. So we should not be talking about books that should be banned or libraries that should be constrained or so. No, we should be talking about parents who can choose what they want for their own child, and people in schools, people in government, people in the court systems. Should we actually live in a republic where we're supposed to honor and respect that authority? There are lots of elements of the state and the country that have moved away from that, but that's the battle we're in, is trying to get back to that very central viewpoint. And so there you have a good example of when we can learn to articulate and state and frame a conflict in such a fundamental, simple way. Well, then we can agree. I'm kind of conservative, but the most rabid liberal can agree with that statement that, well, every household, every parent should be able to choose what they want for their child. Who could possibly be opposed to that? Oh, some are, but the vast majority of Americans, even those who may vote in ways that end up constraining the authority of families, when stated properly and simply, even people on a broad spectrum of a political spectrum, broad scale of political spectrum, can come together on terms of freedom instead of force.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. The first time I ever showed up at a school board meeting here in Northern Colorado, I learned the absolute disdain that many of the board members had for parental involvement. It was actually shocking to me, because I thought we were partners, not partners in parenting, but partners in the education of our kids. And what I discovered was we were a kind of an unnecessary or a necessary, thorn in their side. And we were literally dismissed, disrespected, and even now in many ways, kind of sidelined, marginalized in this debate. And I think you're right. We're fighting at the wrong spot. The right spot is the parents decide what the education of their children looks like. I think part of the problem, though, is that public schools are kind of uniform in this anti-American, anti-freedom, anti-family ideology today. And we're seeing this more and more, that they do not view the parents' role as that of, education of their kids, of taking that primary role. So we have this adversarial relationship oftentimes with the public school leadership. I think what I'm encouraging parents to do, and I want your opinion on this. I know that you're for school choice. You're for giving parents the opportunity to make those decisions. My take is, if the school isn't educating your kids the way you want them to, you have to make a different decision, whether that's homeschooling or finding a charter school that is in alignment with your values, or finding co-ops or private school or whatever the other type of education is. Part of what we want is the money that goes into the education of the kid to go with the kid to whatever educational choice those parents make. You've got a lot of experience in this area. What are the solutions here? Well, thanks for joining us for part 1 with Bob Schaffer, talking about winning the culture war, being persuasive in our arguments, being courageous in our defense of individual liberty and the American way. Join us next time for part 2.